first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh paint. It cut through the morning air like a chemical promise, sharp and industrial, drifting up from the back edge of my property where the old rail spur ran. I was standing on my porch with a cup of coffee, still in my boots from checking the fence line, when I saw the fluorescent orange arrow sprayed directly onto the rusted rail. It pointed east, toward the county road, and it was still wet. I set my coffee down on the railing and walked across the dew-soaked grass, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The arrow wasn't alone. There were 3 more, spaced about 20 feet apart, each one a bright screaming orange against the dark iron and gravel. And at the end of the spur, where the tracks disappeared into a thicket of blackberry bushes and old oak, someone had driven a metal post into the ground and bolted a green and white sign to it. The sign read, in cheerful reflective lettering, Willow Creek Wellness Trail, 1.2 miles. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. And I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had planned this. Someone had brought paint and signs and a post driver onto my land. I pulled out my phone and took a photograph of the sign, then the arrows, then the tire tracks in the gravel that hadn't been there the day before. The tire tracks were narrow, like from a golf cart or a small SUV. I followed them with my eyes back toward the main road, where they disappeared onto the asphalt. Then I walked back to the house, opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila folder that I had inherited from my grandfather 12 years ago. Inside was the original deed, the survey map, and a yellowed document from the county recorder's office dated 1987. The document was titled Notice of Abandonment, Rail Corridor Easement. I didn't know it yet, but that piece of paper was about to become the most important thing I owned. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or state in the comments. I always like to know who's out there listening to these stories. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 42 years old, a civil engineer by training, and I live on a 12-acre parcel about 40 minutes outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. The property has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it in 1962, back when the rail spur was still active, serving a small freight depot that moved lumber and feed. The depot closed in 1985. The tracks were pulled up except for the spur that ran along the back boundary, and the railroad company filed an abandonment notice with the county 2 years later. That abandonment meant the easement reverted to the underlying landowner, which was my grandfather. He never developed the spur. He liked the way it looked, the old iron rails half buried in grass, the wildflowers that grew between the ties, the way the deer used it as a path. When he died in 2011, he left the property to me, with a single instruction written on a note tucked inside the deed folder. The note said, "Keep the spur, it's yours." I kept it. I kept the folder too. I'm not a confrontational person. I spend most of my days designing drainage systems and reviewing site plans for commercial developments. I work from home, I keep to myself, and I've never had a problem with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, which governs the subdivision that borders my property to the north. The subdivision was built in 2004, long after the rail spur was abandoned, and the HOA's covenants explicitly state that their jurisdiction ends at the property line marked by the old rail corridor. I know this because I read the covenants when I moved in. I read everything. It's a habit I picked up from my grandfather, who used to say that a man who doesn't read his own paperwork is a man who's asking to lose his land. The HOA president was a woman named Karen Whitmore. I had met her exactly twice before the paint appeared. The first time was at a neighborhood barbecue 3 years ago, where she spent 20 minutes explaining to me why the subdivision's property values depended on aesthetic cohesion. The second time was when she knocked on my door to ask if I would consider trimming the blackberry bushes along the spur, because they were visually encroaching on the view from the community pool. I trimmed the bushes. I didn't mind. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days after I found the paint, I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing a drainage report when I heard voices outside. Not 1 or 2 voices, but a chorus of them, laughing and chatting, and accompanied by the distinctive click and whir of bicycle gears. I walked out onto the back porch and saw a group of 12 cyclists riding single file along the rail spur, their tires crunching over the gravel, their brightly colored jerseys flashing in the afternoon sun. They were following the orange arrows. They were using my land as a trail. I stood there for a moment, processing the scene, and then I walked down to the spur and raised my hand. The lead cyclist, a man in his 50s with a gray beard and a yellow jersey, slowed to a stop. Morning, he said, breathing hard. Great trail. Is this new? It's not a trail, I said. It's private property. He frowned and looked at the sign. Private? There's a sign right there. Willow Creek Wellness Trail. The HOA sent out an email about it last week. Said it was a new community amenity. The HOA doesn't own this land, I said. I do. The cyclist looked at me, then at the sign, then back at me. You might want to take that up with the HOA then. We're just following the map. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jersey pocket and handed it to me. It was a printed map of the subdivision, with the rail spur highlighted in green and labeled Wellness Trail, Phase 1. At the bottom was the HOA logo and Karen Whitmore's name, listed as Trail Coordinator. I folded the map and put it in my pocket. Thanks, I said. Enjoy your ride. But this is the last time you'll be riding here. The cyclist shrugged and pedaled away, and I watched the rest of the group follow him, their tires grinding over the gravel, their voices fading into the trees. When they were gone, I walked back to the house and added the map to the folder. Then I called the county recorder's office and asked for a copy of the original rail easement and the 1987 abandonment record. The clerk said it would take a few days to pull the files from the archive. I told her I could wait. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and bought a roll of bright yellow caution tape and a pack of wooden stakes. I spent the next 2 hours marking the boundary of my property along the spur, tying the tape between the stakes at waist height, creating a visible barrier. It wasn't a fence, but it was a statement. I also took photographs of everything. The paint, the sign, the tire tracks, the map, the caution tape, the property line markers. I printed the photographs and added them to the folder. The folder was getting thick. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a car horn. I looked out the window and saw a white Lexus SUV parked at the edge of my driveway, its engine running, its driver's side door open. Standing next to the SUV, holding a clipboard and wearing a pastel blazer, was Karen Whitmore. She was staring at the caution tape with an expression of pure, concentrated outrage. I pulled on my boots and walked outside. Mr. Mercer, she said, before I had even reached her. What is the meaning of this? Good morning, Karen, I said. What can I do for you? You can explain why you vandalized the community wellness trail. She pointed at the caution tape with her pen. This is a shared amenity. You have no right to block access. The rail spur is on my property, I said. It's not a shared amenity. It's private land. Karen smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Mr. Mercer, I think you're confused. The rail corridor has been used by the community for years. It's a de facto easement. Our attorney has confirmed it. Your attorney is wrong, I said. The rail easement was abandoned in 1987. The land reverted to my grandfather. I have the paperwork. Karen's smile didn't waver. Paperwork can be misinterpreted. The HOA board has voted to designate the corridor as a wellness trail, and we've already invested significant funds in signage and marketing. The cycling club has added us to their regional map. We have a ribbon-cutting ceremony scheduled for next Saturday. She said this as if it were a done deal, as if my property rights were a minor inconvenience to be managed rather than a legal boundary to be respected. I'm going to ask you to remove the signs and the paint, I said, and I'm going to ask you to cancel the ribbon cutting. And if I don't, then I'll handle it through the proper channels. Karen laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Mr. Mercer, you're one person. The HOA represents 240 homes. We have a legal budget. We have community support. Do you really want to fight this? I don't want to fight anything, I said. I want you to stay off my land. Karen shook her head and walked back to her SUV. The trail will remain open, she said over her shoulder. And I'd advise you to remove this tape before someone gets hurt. Liability works both ways. She climbed into the Lexus and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the faint scent of exhaust. I stood there for a moment, watching her taillights disappear, and then I walked back inside and added a note to the folder. The note said, Karen Whitmore, verbal warning, refused to comply. I dated it and signed it. Then I called my attorney. My attorney's name is Ellen Park. She's a property lawyer in Knoxville, and she's the kind of person who speaks in complete paragraphs and never raises her voice. I've worked with her on a few boundary disputes for my engineering projects, and I trust her judgment. I explained the situation, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. You said you have the abandonment record? She asked. I have a copy from the original filing, I said. I'm waiting on a certified copy from the county. Get the certified copy, she said. And pull the title chain for your parcel. I want to see every transaction from the railroad to your grandfather to you. If there's a gap, we need to know about it now. You think the HOA has a case? I think the HOA thinks they have a case, she said. And that's often more dangerous than actually having one. They'll spend money, they'll file motions, they'll make noise. But if that abandonment record is clean, they don't have a leg to stand on. An abandoned rail easement doesn't create a public trail. It reverts to the fee owner, period. What about the de facto easement argument? De facto easements require continuous, open, adverse use for a statutory period. In Tennessee, that's 20 years. The subdivision has only existed since 2004. That's 19 years. And even if they could prove use, they'd have to prove it was adverse, meaning without permission. Your grandfather's note in the folder suggests he knew the spur was his and he intended to keep it. That's not adverse use, that's tolerated use, which doesn't create an easement. I felt something loosen in my chest. So I'm in the right. You're in the right, she said. But being right and proving it are two different things. Get me the certified documents, and keep documenting everything. I spent the next week doing exactly that. I installed 3 trail cameras along the spur, positioned to capture anyone who entered the property. I downloaded the HOA's covenants from the county website and highlighted every section that referenced property boundaries. I found the original plat map for the subdivision, which clearly showed the rail corridor as a separate parcel, not part of the HOA's common area. I printed the cycling club's online map, which listed the trail as Willow Creek Wellness Trail, new, and included a description that said, scenic ride along a historic rail corridor, open to the public. I saved screenshots of the HOA's Facebook posts promoting the trail, including one that said, join us for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Refreshments provided, and I waited for the certified copy of the abandonment record to arrive. It came on a Thursday, in a thick manila envelope from the county recorder's office. I opened it at my kitchen table, my coffee growing cold beside me, and I read every word. The document was exactly what I remembered. Dated September 14, 1987, it stated that the railroad company had permanently abandoned all rights, title, and interest in the rail corridor, and that the underlying fee interest had reverted to the abutting landowners. Attached was a survey map showing the corridor's boundaries, which matched my property lines exactly. There was also a letter from the railroad's legal department confirming the abandonment and acknowledging that the company had no further claim to the land. I made 3 copies of everything, one for Ellen, one for the folder, and one for Karen Whitmore. Then I called Ellen and told her the documents were in hand. Good, she said. Now we wait. For what? For the HOA to do something stupid. They will. They always do. She was right. 2 days later, I was working in my home office when I heard the sound of an engine outside. Not a car engine, something heavier. And I looked out the window and saw a flatbed truck parked on the shoulder of the county road, its bed loaded with lumber and bags of gravel. 3 men in work vests were unloading the materials and carrying them toward the rail spur. I walked outside and intercepted them at the property line. Can I help you? I asked. The lead worker, a man with a sunburned neck and a clipboard, looked up. We're here to install the trailhead kiosk. HOA job. There's no trailhead here, I said. This is private property. The worker frowned and checked his clipboard. Says here it's the Willow Creek Wellness Trail. We've got a work order signed by Karen Whitmore. Karen Whitmore doesn't own this land, I said. I do, and I'm telling you to take your materials and leave. The worker looked at his clipboard, then at me, then at the caution tape fluttering in the breeze. Look, man, I'm just doing my job. You want to take it up with the HOA? That's your business. But I've got a schedule to keep. If you set foot on my property, I said, I will call the sheriff and report you for trespassing, and I will name you personally in the report. Your name is on that clipboard. I can see it from here. The worker stared at me for a long moment. Then he sighed, turned around, and walked back to the truck. Pack it up, he called to his crew. Job's on hold. I watched them load the materials back onto the flatbed and drive away. Then I called the sheriff's office and filed a report, just to have it on record. The deputy who took the report was polite but clearly uninterested. Civil matter, he said. You'll need to take it up with the courts. I understand, I said. I just want the report on file. It's on file, he said. Good luck. I added the report number to the folder. The folder was now 3 inches thick, stuffed with photographs, maps, printouts, notes, and certified documents. It sat on my kitchen table like a bomb waiting to go off. The next incident happened on a Saturday. I was in town buying groceries when my phone buzzed with a notification from one of the trail cameras. I opened the app and saw a live feed of the rail spur. A group of cyclists was riding along the trail, and leading them was a woman in a pink jersey with a whistle around her neck. She was pointing at the orange arrows and gesturing for the group to follow. I recognized her from the HOA's Facebook page. Her name was Brenda Calloway, and she was the president of the Regional Cycling Club. I drove home as fast as I could, but by the time I arrived, the cyclists were gone. What they had left behind was worse than tire tracks. Someone had cut the caution tape. The wooden stakes were still in the ground, but the tape itself had been sliced cleanly, the yellow ribbons lying limp in the grass. And next to the metal post with the trail sign, someone had placed a small plastic box on a stake. The box contained a logbook and a pen, with a handwritten note taped to the lid. The note said, "Welcome to the Willow Creek Wellness Trail. Please sign in and enjoy your ride." I didn't touch the logbook. I photographed it, photographed the cut tape, and checked the trail camera footage. The camera had captured everything. Brenda Calloway cutting the tape with a pair of scissors, laughing, and saying something to the cyclists behind her. The audio wasn't great, but I could make out the words, "doesn't own it," and "public trail." I saved the footage to a USB drive and added it to the folder. Then I called Ellen. "They cut the tape," I said, "and they installed a logbook. Did you get it on camera?" "Yes." "Good. That's destruction of property and trespassing. It's still a civil matter, but it strengthens our case." "What about the ribbon cutting?" "It's scheduled for next Saturday." Karen mentioned it when she was here. "Then that's our deadline. I'll draft a cease and desist letter and send it to the HOA board. If they go ahead with the ceremony, we'll file for an injunction. But I want to do something else first." "What?" "I want to invite the county engineer to the ribbon cutting." I paused. "The county engineer?" "The abandonment record is a county document. If the HOA is claiming the corridor is public, the county engineer can set the record straight. And if he does it in front of a crowd, there's no way for the HOA to spin it." I thought about it for a moment. "Do you think he'll come?" "I think he'll be very interested to know that someone is claiming a public trail on private land. Counties don't like liability, and they really don't like HOAs that create liability for them." I agreed to the plan. Ellen sent the cease and desist letter the next day, via certified mail and email, to every member of the HOA board. The letter stated, in clear legal language, that the rail spur was private property, that the HOA had no easement or right of access, and that any further trespassing would result in legal action. It also demanded the immediate removal of all signs, paint, and structures from the property. The HOA's response came 2 days later in the form of an email from their attorney. The email was 3 paragraphs of bluster, claiming that the rail corridor was a long-established community asset, that the HOA had invested significant resources in the trail, and that my unilateral obstruction was causing irreparable harm to the community. It ended with a threat to file a lawsuit for declaratory judgment and damages. Ellen read the email and laughed. "They're bluffing," she said. "If they had a real case, they would have filed already. They're trying to scare you into backing down." "It's not working," I said. "Good. Now let's talk about the ribbon cutting." The ribbon cutting was scheduled for Saturday at 10 in the morning. The HOA had promoted it heavily. Flyers in mailboxes, posts on social media, an announcement in the local newspaper. They had even convinced the cycling club to make it an official event, with a group ride starting at the trailhead and ending at the community pool for refreshments. Karen Whitmore had clearly gone all in on the wellness trail, and she had staked her reputation on its success. I spent the week preparing. I met with Ellen twice to review the documents and rehearse the key points. I contacted the county engineer's office and spoke with a man named Robert Haskins, who had been the county engineer for 15 years and who remembered the rail abandonment because his predecessor had signed the original record. Robert was a quiet, methodical man with a deep voice and a habit of pausing before he spoke. When I explained the situation, he listened carefully and then said, "I'll be there. This kind of thing is exactly why we keep records." I also reached out to an old family friend named Walter Greeley. Walter was 83 years old, a retired railroad worker who had spent 40 years maintaining the tracks in this part of the state. He had known my grandfather, and he remembered the spur when it was still active. "I used to ride that line," Walter told me over the phone, "before they pulled the tracks. Your grandfather was always out there, walking the spur, making sure nobody dumped trash on it. He loved that piece of land. Would you be willing to come to the ribbon cutting?" I asked. As a witness? Walter was quiet for a moment. I'll be there, he said. Your grandfather would want me to. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. On Friday afternoon, the day before the ceremony, a teenager knocked on my door. He was about 17, tall and skinny, with paint-stained hands and a nervous expression. Mr. Mercer? He said. My name's Tyler. Tyler Whitmore. Karen's my aunt. I looked at him for a moment. You're the one who painted the arrows. He nodded, his face reddening. She paid me to do it. Said it was a community project. I didn't know it was your property. I swear. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw the letter. The cease and desist. My mom showed it to me. And I realized what I did was wrong. I trespassed on your land and I defaced your property. I'm sorry. He looked genuinely miserable, and I believed him. Did your aunt tell you it was public land? She said it was an old railroad corridor that belonged to the community now. She had a map and everything. I didn't question it. Do you still have the map? He nodded and pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was the same map the cyclist had shown me, but this one had handwritten notes in the margins. The notes were in Karen's handwriting, and they included instructions like paint arrows every 20 feet and install sign at east end. Can I keep this? I asked. Tyler hesitated. Is my aunt going to get in trouble? Your aunt is already in trouble, I said. But you're doing the right thing by telling me. That matters. He handed me the map. I'm sorry, he said again. I really am. Thank you, Tyler. You should go home now. He left, and I added the map to the folder. The handwritten notes were the final piece of evidence I needed. They proved that Karen had personally directed the trespass and the vandalism, and they contradicted her claim that she believed the corridor was public. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of autumn day that makes you want to be outside. I woke up early, made a pot of coffee, and reviewed the folder one last time. Everything was in order. The deed, the survey, the abandonment record, the photographs, the trail camera footage, the cease and desist letter, the HOA's threatening email, the handwritten map, and a statement from Ellen summarizing the legal basis for my ownership. I dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, put the folder in a leather satchel, and walked out to the rail spur. The ribbon cutting was scheduled to start in an hour, but people were already gathering. I counted at least 40 residents, plus a dozen cyclists in their club jerseys. Someone had set up a folding table with a red tablecloth and a pitcher of lemonade. Karen Whitmore was standing next to the table, wearing a white blazer and holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. She was talking to Brenda Calloway, the cycling club president, and a man I didn't recognize. The man was in his 40s, with slick back hair and a polo shirt embroidered with the words, Whitmore Marketing Solutions. I later learned he was Karen's brother-in-law, a marketing consultant who had been hired by the HOA to promote the trail. Karen saw me approaching and her smile tightened. Mr. Mercer, she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd be at home, sulking. A few people laughed nervously. I didn't respond. I walked to the edge of the spur and stood there, waiting. At exactly 10 o'clock, Karen clapped her hands for attention. Welcome, everyone, to the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Willow Creek Wellness Trail, she announced. This is an exciting day for our community. After months of planning and hard work, we're finally opening this beautiful trail for everyone to enjoy. The crowd applauded. Karen beamed. I want to thank the HOA board for their support, Brenda Calloway and the cycling club for their enthusiasm, and my nephew Tyler for his help with the signage. This trail is a testament to what we can accomplish when we work together. More applause. Karen raised the scissors. And now, without further ado, I declare the Willow Creek Wellness Trail officially. Excuse me. The voice came from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned. Robert Haskins, the county engineer, was walking toward the table, carrying a leather briefcase. He was a tall man with gray hair and a calm, authoritative presence. My name is Robert Haskins, he said. I'm the county engineer, and I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Karen's smile flickered. A misunderstanding? This rail corridor is not public land, Robert said. It was abandoned by the railroad in 1987, and the underlying fee interest reverted to the abutting landowner. That landowner is Mr. Daniel Mercer. I have the certified abandonment record right here. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. The crowd went silent. Karen's face went pale. That's not possible, she said. The corridor has been used by the community for years. It's a de facto easement. There is no de facto easement, Robert said. The statutory period for adverse possession in Tennessee is 20 years. The subdivision has only existed for 19. And even if the period had been met, the use would need to be adverse, meaning without the owner's permission. Mr. Mercer's grandfather explicitly acknowledged his ownership of the spur and took steps to maintain it. That's not adverse use. Karen looked around, her eyes darting from face to face. The crowd was murmuring now. The earlier enthusiasm replaced by confusion and, in some cases, anger. "This is ridiculous," Karen said. "We've invested thousands of dollars in this trail. We have a map. We have signs. You have a map that's wrong," I said, stepping forward. I pulled the handwritten map from my satchel and held it up. "This is the map you gave your nephew. It includes instructions to paint arrows on my property and install signs on my land. You knew this was private property, Karen. You just didn't care." Karen stared at the map, and I saw something shift in her expression. The confidence drained away, replaced by something closer to panic. "That's not. I didn't. You did," I said. "And you're going to explain it to the HOA board, and to the residents who donated money for this trail, and to the cycling club that you lied to." Brenda Calloway stepped forward, her face red. "Is this true?" she demanded. "Did you lie to us?" "I didn't lie," Karen said, her voice rising. "I made a reasonable assumption based on—" "You made a reasonable assumption that you could steal my land," I said. "And you were wrong." The next hour was chaos. Residents demanded answers. Brenda Calloway announced that the cycling club was withdrawing its support and would be removing the trail from its regional map. The HOA board members who were present huddled together, whispering urgently. Karen tried to salvage the situation, but every time she opened her mouth, someone interrupted her with another question. Robert Haskins stood quietly to the side, answering questions from residents who wanted to understand the legal situation. Walter Greeley, the retired railroad worker, arrived and told anyone who would listen about the history of the spur and my grandfather's dedication to maintaining it. And I stood in the middle of it all, holding the folder, watching the empire Karen had built collapse under the weight of its own lies. By noon, the crowd had dispersed. The folding table was still there, the lemonade pitcher half empty, the ceremonial scissors lying abandoned in the grass. Karen was sitting on the tailgate of her Lexus, her head in her hands. I walked over to her. "I want the signs removed by Monday," I said, "and the paint, and the logbook, and anything else you put on my property." She looked up at me, her eyes red. "You've ruined me." "You ruined yourself," I said. "I just brought the paperwork." I turned and walked back to my house, the folder heavy in my satchel, the afternoon sun warm on my face. The aftermath took several weeks to fully play out. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Karen from her position as president. They also voted to refund all trail improvement assessments that had been collected from residents, which totaled over $12,000. The signs were removed, the paint was sandblasted off the rails, and the metal post was pulled out of the ground. The cycling club issued a public apology on their website, acknowledging that they had been misled by the HOA and promising to verify property ownership before promoting any future trails. Tyler Whitmore came by my house a few days after the ceremony, looking even more nervous than before. He offered to help clean up the paint, and I let him. We spent an afternoon scrubbing the rails with solvent and wire brushes, and by the end of it, the orange arrows were gone. "I'm sorry about my aunt," he said as we were finishing. "She's not a bad person. She just gets focused." "I know," I said. "But focus without respect for other people's rights is just bullying." He nodded, and I could see that he understood. The legal side took longer. Ellen filed a formal complaint with the county, documenting the trespassing, the vandalism, and the HOA's refusal to comply with the cease and desist letter. The county attorney reviewed the case and issued a formal opinion confirming my ownership of the rail spur and the absence of any public easement. The HOA's attorney, faced with the certified abandonment record and the county's opinion, advised the board to settle. They agreed to pay my legal fees and to issue a written acknowledgement of my property rights. I used part of the settlement to install a proper gate at the entrance to the spur. It was a simple metal gate, painted dark green, with a lock and a sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." I also planted a row of native shrubs along the boundary, creating a natural barrier that would grow thicker with each passing year. The last thing I did was frame the original abandonment record and hang it on the wall of my home office, next to the note from my grandfather. The note said, "Keep the Spur. It's yours." And I did. I still walk the Spur most mornings, coffee in hand, boots crunching on the gravel. The deer still use it as a path. The wildflowers still grow between the ties. And the only arrows I see now are the ones painted by the sun, slanting through the trees at dawn. The folder is back in the filing cabinet, thicker than ever, a record of a battle I never wanted to fight but was always prepared to win. My grandfather taught me that a man who doesn't read his own paperwork is asking to lose his land. He was right, and somewhere, I hope he knows that I kept the Spur. It's mine.